With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Imagínate escuchar tu canción favorita como si fuera la primera vez. Te presentamos el totalmente nuevo y reimaginado Nissan Kicks con sonido Bose Personal Plus y bocinas en la parte superior de los asientos para crear una experiencia 360. Jamás has escuchado algo así. Reimagina tu música y tu forma de manejar. Descubre el totalmente nuevo y reimaginado Nissan Kicks en nissanusa.com. Función disponible. Bose es una marca registrada de The Bose Corporation.
I don't mind you hitting me, Frank, but take it easy on the Bacardi. Oh. To old times, my friend.
Oh, my God. It's...
Lou Hayward, your old boss, your best friend.
But you're... dead.
7 years.
Has it been that long? Geez, I mean, to look at you, I wouldn't have guessed more than 3, tops.
Oh, Frank. Frank, you are in trouble. Big trouble.
All right. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that you're right, that I am in big trouble. What exactly would that mean?
Look at me. Look at your future. Now, if you don't change your ways, you're going to wind up doomed, just as I am.
Oh, if only. If only that were the fate of all evil billionaires. Happy holidays, everybody. Welcome to Book versus Movie, the podcast where we read books that have been adapted into movies, and then we try to decide which we like better, the book or the movie. I am Margot P. of ColoniaBook.com, and this is my good co-host, Margot D. of Brooklyn Fit Chick.
Hi, everyone.
So, welcome. Maybe you're just joining us because you happen to love this book. You happen to love Charles Dickens, and we're glad you're here. We are a podcast that does we cover movies that have been adapted from really any, as long as it's been, as long as it's been an adaptation of a book, a novel, novella, short story, magazine article, song, poem, as long as it has some source material that we can get our eyeballs on, a play, we will consider it. So we are constantly looking for new ideas. We try to give you a brand new episode every single week. The only rules are that the source material has to be accessible. We have to be able to get our hands and eyes on it, like this one. This one is absolutely everywhere, especially this time of year. And we also have to be able to get the movie on a major streaming platform. That's it. Other than that, suggest away. There are numerous places where you can make those suggestions, where you can interact with us. You can meet other listeners of this podcast. Woohoo! Listeners of this podcast on the internet. And Margot's going to let you know where you can do that.
We do have a basic Facebook page. Be sure to like it, but we're much more interactive in our private Facebook group. So you go to Facebook and you type in Book vs. Movie Podcast Group and ask to join. And we really do just talk about books and movies there. And we have a couple of lists run by Thaddeus, one of our group moderators, who keeps us updated on which ones we've covered and which ideas people have out there. Other places to reach us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. We're at Book versus a Movie. You spell out versus there. And we have an old-timey email, Book versus Movie Podcast, spelled it all out, at gmail.com. And if you would like some stickers, email us your address and one of us will send you some stickers.
And if you really enjoy the show and would like to help keep us in books and movies, you can also support us on Patreon.
Yes, Patreon. Margot and I have been doing the show for 10 years now. So we have about a little over 7 years worth of show on our Patreon wall. Episodes include Elvis and Me, In a Lonely Place, The Parent Trap, The Invisible Man, The Bad Seed. Really great podcasts are there. So we have a couple of very affordable options. We appreciate everybody that supports us there. You can also sign up for free because all the clips we play, we also put them on Patreon for free because sometimes with a rights issue, it won't air on Facebook or it won't run on TikTok or it won't run on YouTube. So we make sure everybody can get them. So everybody that supports us there, thank you so much. And, all year round, all of you that support us in every way that you do, including leaving us 5-star reviews. And I want to say thank you to Crestwood Dash for leaving us a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts. It helps us find our people. So thank you so much.
We do really appreciate when you guys take the time to do those reviews. It means a lot. But mostly we just like knowing that you're there. We love when you join us on the Facebook group or on social media, on Blue Sky, which is where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
On YouTube, we're doing these now in a video format. If you're listening to us on an audio format, please know that we are also showing the behind the scenes recording video of this on our respective YouTube channels. Margot's is at
my name, Margot
Donahue. Margot Donahue, and mine is at She's Not Your Mama. And you'll be able to see my beautiful holiday sweatshirt featuring sheep in scarves. And it says Feliz Navidad, like in Spanish, sidestepping the microaggressive pun opportunity of Feliz Navidad, which I know. I was like, wow, look at you guys taking the high road. I'm going to buy your sweatshirt. So yes, I'm trying to up the holiday cheer around here as much as I can possibly muster during this rather Dickensian, I think we can say, holiday season. So, and if you love holiday movies, I wanted to mention also, as Margot said, a lot of our back episodes are on Patreon because we've been doing the show for so long. Most of the places where you're going to hear us only go back like a couple of years. So there are years and years of holiday episodes on our Patreon account, and many of them are available for free.
Yep.
And we have a really exciting episode coming up next for New Year's Eve. We'll get to that at the end. But we've done this book before a couple of times. And we've decided that we're going to now institute an annual episode of some adaptation of A Christmas Carol. So we've done the we did the animated one with
Mr. Magoo.
No, Jim Carrey. Remember?
Jim Carrey's, yes.
Gary Oldman with like kind of slightly creepy.
Yeah, I think it's one of the Robert Zemeckis movies.
Yeah. And I can't remember what the other one was that we did. I want to say it was the Patrick Stewart one. But
I think it was Sir Patrick Stewart.
Yeah. Today, we're talking about one that we kind of came along when we were young folk. We're going to be talking about Scrooged. But before we get to that, we have to talk about the man, the myth, the legend. And here's where I'm going to put the disclaimer. We are not literature majors. We are not film majors. We are just a couple of ladies on opposite coasts of the U.S. who like books and movies. And we take a week to bone up on as much as we possibly can, cram into our busy lives, especially during this time of year. We know that there are people who devote their entire academic careers to covering Charles Dickens, if not this book and all of the historical significance thereof. We're just going to hit the broad strokes here, but because, I don't even know where to begin with Charles. He invented Christmas, pretty much,
Pretty much, yes.
I would not be wearing this corny sweatshirt with the sheep and the Feliz Navidad. We probably wouldn't even have that song if it were not for Charles Dickens. So let's talk about it.
All right. So the broad strokes are, he was born Charles John Hoffman Dickens, February 7th, 1842. He lived to be 58, died in 1870. His family he grew up with money and then also without money. So he knew what it was like to be very wealthy. He also knew what it was like to be in hard times. So he had a lot of empathy for people who lived in poverty. He started writing and working very, very young. There were times where there were workhouses in London and all throughout England. And this is for people who were poor and couldn't pay their bills. They were like, okay, you can live at this place and work off your debts. So there were times when his family had to do that. He started writing at a very young age. He also wanted to be an actor. And when he was 20, he had an audition and he was sick that day and couldn't audition. And then he was always upset about that. But he just took to writing and he started writing serial forms. And his writing was very, very popular in Victorian England. I mean, some of his work, The Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Great Expectations, A Tale of Two Cities. He not only was a brilliant writer, but he was also a brilliant performer. So he would perform his work, and he went across America and did signings, and he made sure to scale the price so that working class people or more poor people could attend him doing these shows, and he would act out his work, and he was treated like a rock star. He was in 1841 or 3, sorry, 1843 is when, through the Chapman and Hill, he published A Christmas Carol, and it was with John Leech's illustrations. They made 5,000 and then they sold out right away. And by this point in 1843, Charles Dickens was very much worried about Christmas traditions starting to go away. People were not singing Christmas carols anymore. It was only recently that the Christmas tree was introduced in England from Germany by Queen Victoria, but people only thought of as like maybe a couple of days off from work and that was it. And then you had New Year's. It was really not, and he loved the holiday. So one of the reasons he created this kind of Christmas cosplay, because he wanted these to become traditions for people. And so it sold out right away, and they kept selling it out over and over again. He's also one of the authors that they took advantage of him for his copyrights, because some people just reprinted it and took the money.
So just to kind of give us a little bit of context, I mean, it's a lot of, there's just so much going on in his work, just the
Imagínate escuchar tu canción favorita como si fuera la primera vez. Te presentamos el totalmente nuevo y reimaginado Nissan Kicks con sonido Bose Personal Plus y bocinas en la parte superior de los asientos para crear una experiencia 360. Jamás has escuchado algo así. Reimagina tu música y tu forma de manejar. Descubre el totalmente nuevo y reimaginado Nissan Kicks en nissanusa.com. Función disponible. Bose es una marca registrada de The Bose Corporation.
Weight loss. It needs to be fast and sustainable. Noom GLP-1 starts at just $149 and ships to your door in 7 days. Take it from Margos, who's loving his journey with Noom GLP-1.
I'm getting to where I want to be. I'm in such a good place right now, and I'm very confident that I'm going to be able to continue this weight loss, this journey, and really make a true lifestyle change.
Don't believe it? Take it from Cam, who's gaining more confidence with Noom GLP-1.
I really am starting to feel better. Like, I feel a lot lighter. I feel a lot happier. I feel a lot more confident. I just feel a lot more like myself. I don't feel so bogged down every day.
$149 GLP-1s? Now that's Noom Smart. Noom, the smart way to lose weight. Get started with Noom GLP-1 at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. Individual results may vary. Not all customers will medically qualify for prescription medications. Compounded medications are not reviewed by the FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality.
Socially, economically, the Victorian era, it's the industrial age. There is a massive gap between the rich and the poor are trying to survive in a system that punishes them for being poor. And so it's this horrible cycle that of corporate greed that seems awfully familiar these days. And he was a very sharp critic of having lived in that system. And then having something of a journalistic and a journalistic background and a peek into how government works. He used his extraordinary talent and storytelling skills to shine a light on the injustices of the system in ways that other activists kind of really weren't able to do. By having these characters that people become emotionally invested in, it really helped bring a lot of the cruelty of the system to light. He gets very famous very young. He's so talented. It's completely warranted. And he has this storybook family as well. His wife publishes a book about, I can't remember if it's about Christmas time specifically, but it's sort of like a little Martha Stewart-y kind of homemaking, from Mrs. Dickens. And
I'm not aware of this.
I've never read it either. It's one of these things I keep meaning to buy, and I keep forgetting to buy it for myself. But yeah, she published this very famous, like a little homemaking guide, because they were this model family. She had, was it 10 kids?
10. He also, he's a very complicated man, because on the one hand, he had a lot of empathy for poverty, for poor people. He would also visit children and women. Yeah. He had a home for homeless women in London so that they wouldn't have to work as sex workers, that they could learn some other trade, because a lot of these women were widows or, abandoned by their husbands. And if you didn't marry the right person and you were a woman, there weren't a lot of options for you.
You didn't have rights. No. You couldn't vote. Yeah.
And at the same time, though, he was married to someone he wasn't very kind to. I mean, to say
no, really
least.
Not at all.
Yes.
No. First of all, this poor woman, 10 kids. 10. How many years are you pregnant or recovering from pregnancy? And he was becoming very famous, and he was touring all over the world. He famously toured the United States and was just a humongous success. And he blamed his wife for having so many kids. Like, why do you insist on having this many kids? Like she's doing it somehow. And then he gets angry with her for, as it was sometimes said, letting herself go, for having a body of a woman who has had 10 kids, and uses that as an excuse to start having a lot of very public affairs, extremely public. And then eventually he leaves her. And because the laws are so unfair to women, as you said, she doesn't get custody of the kids. He leaves her and takes almost all of the children. I think only like 2 of the sons have the decency to try and help their mom out. And I think the other ones are younger, but some of the older kids didn't go with the dad. And he treated her abominably, because he was trying to extricate himself from this situation that he himself had created. He unsuccessfully tried to get her committed to an asylum so that he would be free of her and be, have control of, whatever assets she still had. Anyway, he's not a great husband or father for someone who stood up to
oppression.
Systems that were cruel to women and children. Yeah.
He also visited asylums to see how patients were treated. So he knew where he was sending her.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Complicated man.
Complicated man, but really an extraordinary writer. And it's just such good writing. You can't, like when we talked about Hemingway, it's same thing. Like Hemingway is a complicated guy, it's not somebody, like if your best friend was dating Hemingway, you'd be like, maybe, nah. But the writing is just spectacular. And so, the way that he builds characters are so 3-dimensional and allegorical at the same time. They're realistic, but they're also kind of mythical in their way. And he writes in a way that anybody of any class can just dive right in and live in that world. And you can totally see why he was such a mega star. And so much so that even though he's quite young when he writes A Christmas Carol, I forgot he died at 58. 58.
Yeah, cerebral hemorrhage. But he also survived. I forgot about this. He was in a train crash that went over a bridge, and the private cars, almost all of them fell into the water except his. He jumped into the water and held some people before their deaths. Up to 10 people died. He lived through that, and he had a manuscript for one of his books I'm not that familiar with, and he took that with him. And then after that, they said he didn't like riding trains very much or travel very much. And I said, yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
I'm sure he had PTSD.
But he's so famous by the time he writes A Christmas Carol. And as you said, he's famous for putting these stories in. We've talked about this before, that during this time, it was very common, and a lot of writers were very successful in serializing their stories in magazines and newspapers. It was a different kind of landscape then, and it was sort of like soap operas.
Mm-hmm.
People would continue to buy the publication to see what was going to happen next in the story. But he felt very strongly that A Christmas Carol needed to be told all in one go, kind of. And so I believe it was at his own expense, he published the story. And he also insisted that the illustrations, that it be illustrated in color, which was extremely costly for him. And it was an expensive little book, but not ridiculously expensive. He did do everything he could to keep the cost down. And then of course it continues to sell and sell and sell during this time of year. And I've bought it several times.
And I listen to it every year. And my version is with Sir Patrick Stewart every single year.
It's really good.
It's really good.
Super good.
It just always gets to me.
And you and I grew up at a time, and I wonder if we have some listeners from the UK. And again, we apologize for our brutalist attempt at capturing the life of Charles Dickens. But I wonder if in British television during our lifetime, it was the same thing that was going on in American television, where when you and I were growing up, every single situation comedy television show that we were watching had a Christmas Carol episode, had a similar. We had George Jefferson as Scrooge. We had, apart from the TV movie versions, which that's a whole thing in and of itself, with Henry Winkler and
Susan
the
Lucci.
Muppets. Susan Lucci, Ebby, that's one of my favorites. Vanessa Williams. But also Family Ties had one like that. I mean, there were countless television shows did an episode that was just kind of wrote itself to do a Christmas Carol episode. And so we watched them every single year. Every year. They're fun.
They're great. It's a redemption story. Who doesn't like that?
Yeah. We want to believe that the evil billionaire is going to have a conscience.
At the last minute.
At the last minute. Perhaps. Maybe before January. So it has everything. This story just has absolutely everything. Our character of Ebenezer is so deliciously mean and unfeeling to the people who he depends on, not just the people in his life who care about him and who have been there, but he actually is dependent on these folks. You know, who is he without Bob Cratchit there to run things?
Right.
He's not doing that job. So, and then to take us, we've all seen through history figures like this, powerful men who seem to have no heart. And you do wonder, like, what happened to you? Like, why are you like this? And this story goes, okay, let's look at what makes somebody like this. Yes, there can be a natural tendency to all humans. We have all children have a natural tendency to occasionally like swipe a piece of candy or lie to their teacher. But that doesn't become a lifestyle, right? You eventually learn the difference between right and wrong. But where are those forks in the road that end up with somebody like an Ebenezer Scrooge? And so this story takes us all the way back to his childhood, and he's just a vulnerable little boy like everybody else, and taking us through those choices, how choice by choice he ends up in this place where nobody cares if he lives or dies. And in fact, not only that, people are glad that he's dead and are fighting over, his treasures as though they're just worthless scraps. So, what's not to like?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's Christmas Eve, and Ebenezer, he says "bah humbug" to all things ecclesiastical when people are trying to get him.
Oh, I was going to. You just reminded me. He says "bah humbug," and we should also remember that this is a time that people didn't take Christmas off in Victorian England. Like, they worked all the way through, and if they had a really nice boss, they might get, the second half of Christmas Eve off or something like that, but people did not get that week between Christmas and New Year's off, or even, the day of off. And then the other thing I forgot to mention was that, and maybe I'm remembering this incorrectly, but I have a recollection from the last time we talked about Dickens that, when Dickens was a little boy, England had, it wasn't exactly a mini ice age, but it had a series of very, very cold and snowy winters, Christmases. But during most of the Victorian era, that was not the case. So, but in his telling of this story, we get this kind of snowy, icy, environment, and which has colored our, my stupid little sweatshirt with the sheep on it has got snow coming down. We imagine Christmas as this snowy time because of his childhood and his setting the stories at that time. And this is also why we say Merry Christmas, I think, this story. Most people in the UK say Happy Christmas. And we here in the US say Merry Christmas more often. I think it's because of A Christmas Carol.
I'm not sure of that.
I seem to remember hearing that somewhere. Anyway,
let
all kinds of our traditions. Yeah, let us know. You'll let us know. All kinds of traditions come from this book. Come from Dickens in general, but in this book in particular. And so, yeah, as Margot was saying, he's I was trying to think of the social media term.
Incel, maybe. He's someone, right?
He kind of is.
He grew up very poor. He has a chip on his shoulder. When he's young, he falls in love with a woman who is from a much higher strata, and they love each other so much that she's like, let's get married. Let's start a family. Let's start our lives together. And he famously says, no, I want to be rich first. I want to be powerful first. Then I will be good enough to marry you. And then blah, blah, blah. And she didn't want to wait around for that. And so
but before that,
yeah.
he's little and he, I can't remember the circumstances, but he has to stay. He goes to a boarding school. And he doesn't have, his family doesn't want him or can't afford for him to come home for Christmas. And so he has to stay in the school over Christmas. And so all of this is to say he grows up being made to feel ashamed for being poor. And so what that does to him is not to want to fight for the poor. It makes him hate the poor. And so he hates even the notion that he was not as rich, as powerful as everybody else. And so to the point where it brings out this kind of greedy little strain in him that drives the only woman he ever loved out of his life. And you're like, no.
He marries his work, basically. And so he's a miser. He won't spend a penny more for anything than he has to. And when it's Christmas Eve when we meet him, and they're about to close the shop, and there are kids walking by, caroling, and he screams at the carolers. He won't donate to the poor. He gives Bob Cratchit a hard time about taking the day off for Christmas. He's miserable. And by the time he gets home, he's in this huge house all alone, but it's drafty because he won't spend the money for lights, and he won't spend the money on good furniture, or he won't spend it on himself even.
Exactly. So Dickens is just so brilliant. So, but first of all, he sets the tone like it. You just feel the bone-chilling cold of this Christmas time in Victorian England. And he does make a point of saying that, so Ebenezer has cheated and cut corners and overworked his staff to profit and profit and profit. And for what? He doesn't live lavishly. He doesn't even protect his own health by heating his room.
Right.
He can, and Dickens makes a real, he's so good at giving us the details of the room so that we understand he can well afford to be in a lavish, heated mansion filled with servants. He's doesn't have to live like this, but he's living in this way that anybody would be miserable and grumpy.
Yeah.
And, but he's so stingy that he can't even be generous with himself.
Right. And he also has a nephew. So he had a sister who passed away, and his only living relative is his nephew, and his nephew visits him and says, "Merry Christmas, Uncle. Are you coming over? Please come over." And of course, he's not going to come over because Christmas is humbug. And he doesn't invite his nice family over to his big house. And they're inviting him over, but he's so closed off. He's full of self-loathing. He's unhappy. He's miserable, and he doesn't know, and he's just kind of existing. So he shoos them all away, and he comes home, and he sees his past business partner, Marley, in the doorknob, but he thinks it's just a vision. He thinks he's just kind of hallucinating. It's so creepy.
It's so scary. I remember being so frightened by that passage as a child when I read the book for the first time. Of course, again, by then I'd seen how many episodes, Christmas Carol episodes of how many television shows. And when I finally read the book, it scared me to pieces. It took me forever to get past that first chapter. I remember. I remember putting the book away because it scared me so much. I thought, oh no, I'm not ready for this. And interestingly, for as grouchy and miserly and stingy he is, he doesn't. He's aggrieved, as such people tend to be, in spite of their unlimited wealth. But he's not exactly, he feels sorry for himself, but he doesn't really feel sorry for himself. He feels sorry for himself, but he doesn't really have compassion for himself, I guess is the thing. That comes later on in the story. So yeah, he's complaining, and it's so hard, and ways, and the door knocker transforms. Oh my goodness. So then he's visited by the ghost of his equally dreadful, they were like crony tycoons together, Marley. And Marley's ghost shows up, and he's got chains. Marley's ghost is not happy in the afterlife, despite all of the wealth that he accumulated in this world. And Scrooge is like, what's up with that?
And he explains to him, Marley says, "You're not living right. I'm on the other side. It's miserable. All these chains are representing what I've done to people, the guilt burden that I carry in the afterlife, of all the children that are starving, of all the people I treated poorly. And you got to get it together, or this is going to be your future." And and Scrooge is kind of rolling his eyes. Yeah, whatever. And that's when he says, look, you're going to be visited by 3 ghosts. Ghost of Christmas past, then the ghost of Christmas present, then the ghost of Christmas future. And then by tomorrow morning, Christmas morning, hopefully you have seen the light. So
which doesn't seem likely. Because already by the time and this is early in the book, by the time we've gotten to this point where Marley shows up, Scrooge has had numerous opportunities to be a good guy, even a little bit of a good guy, even, throwing a little cash at some people who were begging in the street. He could easily afford to do that. It would not harm his life at all to, give a coin here or there, but
mm-hmm.
Or to give his clerk Bob Cratchit, an extra hour with his family, his large family with his ailing little boy. No.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time Marley shows up and is like, whoa, this is going to happen to you, you, the reader, are like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't see it. Doesn't seem likely.
He's a tough customer.
He's a tough customer. Yeah. So we, the reader, we're just like, ooh, we're rubbing our hands. We're so excited to see, like, where is this going to go? Ghosts. Okay.
It's the Victorian age. There were a lot of ghost stories and mystical stories, and people were getting into the spiritual. So it makes perfect sense that they would be attracted to this. It's also the industrial age, and the industrial age was funded by the work of really hardworking people who were paid a lot. I wonder if that sounds familiar. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people exploited to create wealth for very few. So sure enough, I love his like humbug. Like he assumes like, I must have eaten something that disagreed with me.
Yes. Yes.
It's very humorous. It's just delightful. He's so terrible. He's so delightfully terrible. And, but you, the reader, look, you're holding the book in your hands. You've got so much of the book left to go. Something's coming along, because this is not the end of the story where he just goes humbug and goes back to sleep and goes on with his life. Something is coming. And sure enough, he is awakened by the ghost of Christmas past.
And it has like, he opens up his coat and there's children starving under the coat, and
that's Christmas present.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The ghost of Christmas past shows him his past, and so shows him like what he was like when he was younger, and the stresses that he had, and the times when he was happier, and times when he was at a fork in the road and he chose a definitive direction that wasn't happiness and that wasn't serving him well ultimately.
Yeah. And also shows him that he has had all the opportunities to be happy. It shows him he has a sister, his nephew's mother who is long dead. And so it shows us a little bit of his relationship with her, and that she really loved him. And then we also see him with his first employer, Mr. Fezziwig, which is one of my favorite scenes in the book. And Mr. Fezziwig is one of those good bosses who wants the employees to let loose a little bit on Christmas. And, we've worked hard all year. We deserve a little bit of a celebration. And he and his wife, they get a little party going there at the office before sending everybody off for Christmas. And I think that's where we meet his, the woman that he loves, right?
I think she's the owner's daughter or
oh gosh,
the boss's daughter.
Belle. I cannot remember what her relationship is, but anyway, so yes, he wants to marry her, but he also has this shame about being poor and not being good enough, and it's driving him to make not the greatest choices, even though the woman he loves and even his boss are like, you got to loosen up. Like life, what are you even making money for if it's not to enjoy your life? And then we learn that Belle Because again, she's a woman during this time. What is she supposed to sit around? She's not going to start a business.
Right.
She has to get married. So she gets married to somebody else. And that is, we find all of that out. And that's the ghost of Christmas past. And that is not enough though to quite convince him, quite get through that crusty exterior of Ebenezer Scrooge, as we, the reader, could have told you a long time ago.
Yes.
It's just, I love how Dickens brings you in as the reader. Like you just feel like such an insider when you're reading his work, and watching these stories unfold. You just feel like, oh, I know. Oh, this isn't gonna change you, or oh, whoa, this is really gonna shake him up when he hears about this. It's so wonderful, and I just love the illustrations. Are magical, absolutely magical. So then we have the Ghost of Christmas Present. So now he's going to get to see all of the things that are going on around him that he could see if he just chose to open his eyes, but he chooses to ignore. His nephew, in spite of how gruff he is and all that, his nephew is all of the good that was his sister is still alive in his nephew. And his nephew is not giving up on him. His nephew is constantly reaching out to him, inviting him to participate, even that he knows if Scrooge did show up, he'd just be a big grump and ruin everything. Nephew doesn't care. Nephew's going to keep inviting him. And the nephew isn't terribly wealthy either. He's okay.
He's middle class.
He's doing okay. Yeah. But then we also see Bob Cratchit, who Scrooge has exploited, I think we can say.
Yeah.
Exploited for many, many years. Not valued the work, as I say, that he himself depends on. He really is dependent on Bob Cratchit, and yet does not pay him anywhere near what he is worth. And Bob Cratchit has a large family, and I love Mrs. Cratchit.
Yes.
We are all Mrs. Cratchit.
Because he wants to drink to his boss at the dinner table, their meager dinner for Christmas. And he says, to the founder of this feast. And she immediately, I would give him an earful if he were in this room right now. Blah, 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 blah. Like she's telling us like exactly how she feels about him and how everybody feels about him.
Yeah.
And Bob is like, well, come on, he's my boss. We're doing the best we can. There are not a lot of jobs out there. And Tim, our son, our youngest Tim, is sick. And we really need this. And so she just for the sake of her husband. And she says, just because I love you. Merry Christmas, Mr. Scrooge.
Not for him.
Not for him.
But for you.
Right. And then he goes and he sees the nephew's house, and the nephew is trying to tell everyone, they're saying like, why do you even invite this guy? And he says, he's my uncle. My sister loved him. There's something good in there that, maybe it's when she died, that he lost something, but I think there's something good there. So he understands like, there are people in his life that still care about him, even though he's not the best to them.
Yeah. And we, the reader, have already seen in the Ghost of Christmas Past's visions how Scrooge's sister really cared for him and really loved him. And so when his nephew in the Ghost of Christmas Present vision, his nephew is talking about, trying to maintain that relationship. We get it. We really understand that he is carrying on what his mother would have wanted him to do, because it's the right thing. And also because it feels better to be nice than to be not nice. And so, Scrooge is like, I guess, but what really gets him is little tiny Tim.
God bless us, everyone.
He is
poor Tim.
Of all of the adaptations, the many, many, many adaptations of this story, and the many attempts to give us a heartbreaking little urchin of a tiny Tim, nobody still comes close to Dickens himself in just the frail little trooper who the whole family, he's like the mascot for the whole family. And they just, as upset and angry and they are, and as much as they're struggling, they have to keep their chins up because Tiny Tim, he's just such a little trooper. And yeah, and that's where we finally start to see the little cracks in Ebenezer Scrooge. Like even he is not immune to the heartstring tugging power of Tiny Tim.
And he even says, well, is Tim going to be okay? Because he didn't even know Cratchit. I don't even know if he had kids, or never even met the spouse, but he certainly doesn't know about Tim's condition. And so he actually is concerned there. And he says to the Ghost of Christmas Present, is Tim going to be okay? And he says, I only have a vision, and it's a year from now. There are crutches by the fire, and there's nobody there, meaning that Tim's going to be gone, dead. So that's enough but he still needs to learn that one last lesson. So that's when we get the Ghost of Christmas Future, and the Ghost of Christmas Future is terrifying. Right.
The scariest one of all. The scariest of all. Oh, we forgot to say, in the Ghost of Christmas Present, speaking of scary, the scary moment, each one has their kind of moment, their chilling moment. Each of these little staves, as they're called in the book, has a chilling moment. In the Ghost of Christmas Present, it's when because the Ghost of Christmas Present is this jolly, well-fed, celebratory. It's a beautiful, the illustrations again set the standard that I don't think any of the adaptations have ever achieved. Some of them have gotten close, but the illustrations are just so wonderful. And Scrooge notices like there's some little, like something poking out underneath at the very bottom of the Ghost of Christmas Present's beautiful, luxurious robe. And he opens it up and there are these terrifying children.
Like these demon children.
They're so scary.
And they're meant to show us like the state of like children around the world that are starving, that are being abused and ignored. And so that's like, that's
and
his
even Scrooge is like, whoa, yikes. What do we do about this? And the Ghost of Christmas Present echoes Scrooge's own words back to him about, are there no workhouses? Right. So in other words, they're like this because of the cruelty of people like you. And so that rattles him. And then the whole Tiny Tim thing. So then he's like, oh man, okay, there's supposed to be 3 ghosts. That's 2. What could possibly come next? Oh, the scariest one of all. The third one is so scary. He doesn't even speak. Doesn't even speak.
No, and he just takes him around London and shows him what it's like in the future. And in the future, it stinks. Everyone that knew him is not doing better there. But it's that he leaves, he dies, and no one cares. They just tear apart his house and they just sell off his things for like cordwood, basically, as a toss away. And then he just sees his gravestone and no one visits it. And no one cares. And that's the whole point of the story. Like, you had all this money, you had all this power, you had all this influence. And what did you do with it?
Yeah. And that's when he finally, as we know, he finally breaks down. I want to live. And I love, and it's just, again, it has everything. It's so heartbreaking. It's terrifying. And it's also so funny. When he wakes up and he's all tangled up in the bedclothes and the curtains, and he has that he is now reborn, and then he throws open the window and he yells to the boy, tells him to go buy the goose. He takes it over to the Cratchits, and they're like, "What happened to this guy? Is he having a stroke or what?" And it's such a wonderful payoff at the end. It's so Christmassy and so happy. He is completely to the other extreme of where we found him. And overnight, if only, and and you, the reader, are you're so happy for him. You've been with this guy through this whole story, this absolutely seemingly unredeemable, dreadful, horrible person. And you eventually, through the tale of his life and how he got to be that person, you start to root for him.
Mm-hmm.
You start to really feel compassion for him, which is very interesting. And Mr. Dickens, and then by the end, we're genuinely so thrilled for Mr. Scrooge that he has seen the light and will keep Christmas in his heart.
I love that,
etc., etc.
He's as good a man as ever lived. I think.
Come on,
yeah, that's amazing.
It's never too late. So, spoiler alert book.
But we're going to do multiple versions of this.
We're going to do this every year. It's always going to be book. But there are many, many, many good versions, and as many that we haven't even talked about yet.
Mm-hmm.
The animated one, I remember it was just the animation, right? That we thought was a little creepy. But the performances, as I recall, were very good.
It was better than the one that was the Christmas one that was with Tom Hanks, and it had that train. What's the one?
That one was unsettling because of the animation. It was just downright unsettling, and that was unfortunate. Yeah,
that was an early version of that kind of animation. So
sometimes the technology, isn't what it could be.
Yeah,
which is a great segue into our movie, because here is what was then a modern retelling. It had been a minute since we'd had one for the big screen, and we are setting it at a time, and again, we have to set the scene because it's not the landscape that we have today. There's always going to be greed, and there's always going to be people exploiting other people to make profit, and have no compassion. But the landscape, looks different from era to era. Now we're talking about the very zenith of network television profit in the 1980s. The era of the now besmirched Cosby Show and Johnny Carson. We had 3 networks. Cable was just a little frittering little moth that was just on the fringes of things. The internet was but a spectacle in the imagination of some nerds out in Silicon Valley, and so really the power was in these 3 main networks, and it did get very cutthroat, and there was a lot of money involved. And all the power was held by these just a couple handful of guys, some of who were later disgraced for some pretty shady shenanigans. But at this point, they were riding high.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look at our Reagan era.
Yes, it is. I was just going to say, it's Reagan era.
Oh, here we go.
I got into broadcasting because I like to give.
Hey, that's my cab!
Sometimes I found myself hurting from giving too much.
Fire these people!
But it's Christmas.
Bah humbug.
You are going to be visited by 3 ghosts. Expect the first one tomorrow at noon.
God, tomorrow's bad for me, Lou.
I'm the ghost.
I'm the ghost of Christmas present.
I had a funny feeling.
I can't get the antlers glued onto this little guy.
Have you tried Staples?
Don't you dare.
We're so happy, but so poor.
She made me do for a raise.
Maybe?
Yeah, probably. May I? Oh, I'm having the weirdest day.
It's never too late. You can always change if you want to.
I've never liked a girl enough to give her 12 sharp knives.
For a couple of hours out of the whole year, we are the people that we always hoped we would be.
Did I forget something, big man?
God bless us,
remember being in the movie theater the year that this was coming out, and this being the trailer, and people going bananas in the movie theater. It was probably months away from release, and we were so excited. It's hard to again, it was a different era. It was such a smaller media landscape. You had movies, big Hollywood movies, Ghostbusters, Bill Murray was
famous.
I mean, he's a huge star now, but he was everywhere on television, big screen and small screen. And but watching this trailer and going, oh my gosh, of course, Cal Kane is the ghost of Christmas. She's wonderful. Oh, we're so excited. It's a great trailer.
Yeah, it is a very good trailer.
I mean, well, okay. Richard Donner. Let's start there. Lived to be 91.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And I forgot he directed The Goonies.
He directed, and also Superman. And The Omen.
Yeah.
He has a
and
lot
lots
of hit
television.
Films. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of TV that you and I would have seen growing up. Twilight Zone, Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Rifleman. He worked in a lot of different genres. And what I think is really cool about that is this is a film that's set in the world of television.
Right.
So it does have a very, somebody who worked at a TV station for a minute, it does have a very TV feel. It really feels very authentic compared to a lot of other movies where we're talking about the world of television. And so, yeah, it really does have a very authentic feel to it, which is you really need, because the characters these are very broad characters that we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, so it's Richard Donner. The screenplay is by Mitch Glazer and Michael O'Donoghue. O'Donoghue, I know, wrote for Saturday Night Live, and he was in that circle of friends. So Bill Murray's last big movie was Ghostbusters before he filmed this one, and he actually took a few years off because he became so famous. It's hard to explain to you guys. I mean, there was just Stripes.
Big.
There were a few huge films that he had. He was so funny and had so much currency. So he said that actually filming this was kind of a misery for him because there was one script and it was with Glazer and O'Donoghue, and then Donner wanted to do something else. So they wanted to use practical effects. So they wanted to make it as modern as possible. But then they really wanted to give, and Bill Murray said he really wanted to make sure that they gave the backstory of him, because he felt it was almost cartoonish. I mean, and it is. It's over the top.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Frank Cross is Bill Murray, and he's the president of the IBS network. It opens with a Lee Majors Santa Claus movie where he's shooting at elves. I mean, it's satire right off the bat about this station.
This is the state of network television at that time. They were producing. I mean, we just recently talked about the variety show era. So this is after that era, but there's still a lot of like holiday spectaculars that would air on television during this time. And so this was not it sounds ridiculous, like, oh, we're going to do a live this version of A Christmas Carol starring Buddy Hackett.
And Mary Lou Retton as Tiny Tim. Come on.
It writes itself.
It really does. So he plays a commercial. They're playing him commercials or promos for upcoming specials. For the Christmas Day. So they have one with Lee Majors' movie. That's the action movie. Then they have Robert Goulet's Cajun Christmas, which made me laugh stupid hard. I forgot about that one. I mean, they just have all these insane promos for shows. And then
but not that insane. Like, this is the kind of stuff that would be on television. Absolutely. We would have, because we'd all be, by this point, thanks to unions, a lot of us would have some time off between Christmas and New Year's. And this is all that was on television, y'all. It was spectacular after spectacular. The Mandrell sisters and,
the Osmonds.
and the Osmonds, and normal television shows like Johnny Carson, and they would do big holiday things, and it was, I mean, you could only create so much content, you know, before we start getting real silly with the concepts. Like Robert Goulet's Cajun Christmas could totally have happened,
and I would have
what I-
watched it to be
would
sure.
have watched.
Yeah.
We'd be like, remember Robert Goulet's Cajun Christmas? Yeah, you guys. So it's funny because it's true. It's funny because those of us watching this in the movie theater, we were laughing so hard because this is exactly the kind of stuff that was on television, and it's just so funny.
So Bill Murray says, you know, and none of this is good enough. This is the kind of Christmas I want. And then he makes a very scary trailer for Christmas. Like he wants to frighten people so that they don't leave home, so they'll have to watch TV because they're too scared to go outside. And then we have little baby Bobcat Goldthwait as one of his employees, who's so good in this movie, I think.
Really excellent in this.
Elliot Loudermilk has the one person who raises his hand and says, you know, I really don't think that this is appropriate. I don't think we should be doing this. We're scaring people. And Frank fires him. And it's Christmas Eve. So he's sent out, and he has a put upon assistant played by Alfred Woodward. It's Grace Cooley.
Alfred Woodward.
Who's incredible. And so wonderful. And
it's such a good cast. It's such a solid cast. And just, you know what I love is that we have, so they sat down, obviously. How fun must this have been? Like, we're going to plan this holiday spectacular for this film. Like, what is this holiday spectacular? Well, we're going to do a live version of A Christmas Carol, and it's going to star Buddy Hackett and Jamie Farr. And instead of Tiny Tim Tiny Tim will be played by Mary Lou Retton, America's sweetheart at the time. I mean,
yes,
another one. It's hard to explain to people who weren't there how literally she was America's sweetheart. Everybody loved Mary Lou Retton. She was on cereal boxes.
Mm-hmm.
She was on all kinds of commercials for things. So to have Mary Lou Retton be Tiny Tim, and you, the audience, hearing them pitch this, your mind is already going to, she's going to vault. She's going to like do some kind of
somersault,
fun tumbling run or something at the end. We've got Robert Mitchum.
We just talked about him recently.
When we talked about Night of the Hunter.
Thank you. Preston.
Underrated.
Yes. He's Preston Rhinelander. So he's in charge of the network, and he's Frank's boss now. And so Frank is going to put on a live TV special. So these people have to work on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, like for this. He doesn't care. He just wants the ratings. That's all he cares about. That's what he's all about. And at one point, he thinks he's seeing things, like after he fires Bobcat Goldthwait. He's getting glimpses, and this is when John Forsythe is introduced into this show. So Frank had already at this point, he panic called an ex-girlfriend, Karen Allen, who's Claire. He's been snapping at everybody. There's another guy that's directing the special that definitely has his eye on Frank's job, and so he's himself is scheming to like push Frank out of the way. And so,
we see it's a very cutthroat world, and that Frank is not the only shark in the tank.
And it's true. And it is a cutthroat world. I mean, and the media world is just, winner take all. That is pretty much it. But he turns down going to stay at his brother's house for Christmas Eve. He, talks to his girlfriend for a minute, and then he, shows her away.
Oh, let's talk about the Murray brothers.
So there are, three Murray brothers that are in this movie. I'm sorry, do you have their names?
There's the older one is Brian.
Ryan.
Who's in the one we talked we haven't talked about Christmas Vacation, but we've seen it a lot. So he's the one who is the boss in Christmas Vacation.
Yes.
Brian Doyle Murray.
Murray.
And then the Joel, I think, is the younger one. And Joel plays Frank's younger brother. So it's not a nephew in this, it's a younger brother.
Right.
Because he's not as old as Scrooge is.
No, he's only in his 40s.
For him to have a nephew, that's a child. So it's a younger brother, which I really like.
Yeah, no, that's a good change. And then Frank goes, so Frank is visited first by John Forsythe. And so John Forsythe, who we knew from Charlie's Angels, but he had a career way before that and way after
Dynasty.
it. And Dynasty. Yeah, those were huge in our childhood. Those were like totemistic. So he shows up with him, and you saw the clip at the top of the show.
It's
so good.
Genius. Okay, the casting in. So again, if you weren't there, John Forsythe, as Margot said, straight off of Charlie's Angels and Dynasty. So we knew him as the most glamorous, suave, handsome, silver fox.
Yep.
Of the small screen. Very, very glamorous. What's the word I'm looking for? Yes, elegant, dapper, just the absolute picture of 1980s, elite manhood, if you will. And so he shows up, and just have him show up and be this absolutely disgusting zombie golfer.
Mice-infested golfer.
Oh, it's so gross. It's so delightfully gross. Ah.
And he tells him, you're going to be visited by 3 ghosts. Like, this is what happened to me. I was you're heading straight into this direction. So you're going to be visited by 3 ghosts. And hopefully by the time your special airs, you'll have the Christmas spirit in you. So Bill Murray's like, yeah, whatever. And they do great. The New York City locations are fantastic. It's all around Rock Center. It feels very real. So Frank's first visit is David Johansen, who's the ghost of Christmas Past, who is so funny in this movie.
He's so funny in this.
He's a cab driver, of course.
Of course he's a New York City cab driver. He's okay. David Johansen, the New York Dolls. I think is this before or after Buster Poindexter?
I can't remember, but Buster Poindexter was a character he created, and he sang a song called "Hot, Hot, Hot," which was a big hit. But
it was a huge
hit. It was like big revival for his career. But he was from the New York Dolls, and he's in New York City. You could hear it in his voice. He's a New York City person, but he takes Frank in his cab back to the 50s because Frank is a boomer, and he shows Frank that when he was a baby, when he was a young kid, and he's watching TV, of course, because he was obsessed with TV as a kid. His father is a butcher, and he comes home and he's grouchy, and he just throws him some prime rib, as his Christmas present. He didn't get
his Christmas gift,
not the choo-choo train that he really wanted. And his father just is condescending and dismissive, but his mother is smoking a cigarette, like 12 months pregnant. But she loves his little Frankie Angel, Niagara Fools. Like, that's what he starts crying. So he shows him that. And then he shows Frank, 10 years later, when Frank is first working at the network in the late 60s. And there's a holiday Christmas party. And it looks like the best holiday office Christmas party ever. Like, everyone's
it looks like a lot of fun, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like they were having fun. And John Forsythe, once again, a silver fox. He's, Frank is panning the papers of the memos and things like that. And everybody else is having a good time partying. And John Forsythe is telling him, like, come on, it's Christmas. Come out and join us. He goes, I'm not sure. I got work to do. Maybe I'll drop by later. And this is when he meets Karen Allen, who they meet outside, a very meet cute. She bumps his head on the door. They bump their heads when they're talking to each other. They look great together. They look very believable as a couple.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. They have a lot of chemistry for sure.
And so so they fall in love, they live together, they have a studio apartment in New York City, and they just are having a great life together. And then they're living together for a few years, and Frank is going up the chain and he's working on a dog show, but he really wants to be in upper management. He wants to be a programmer. And so Lou, his boss, John Forsythe, asks him out to dinner that night with her and with him and his girlfriend. And Claire is there, and she says, oh no, but we always spend Christmas Eve with our friends. We've been planning this for months. And this is when they have a falling out, because he says, well, why can't you be unselfish and think about me for a change?
Oh, he's so terrible to her.
It's awful. And she's
and
heartbroken.
He's so up his own butt. And so again, just like in the book, he's so blinded by his weakness of wanting to of greed and wanting to impress the boss and wanting to climb the chain, that he does not realize how insensitive and hurtful he's being to her. But Frank, with older Frank, who's watching all of this unfold with the ghost, is like, what am I saying? Why am I letting this happen? What are you doing?
Right.
And so he's finally starting to realize that it wasn't just a falling out. It was the mistake that he made. He is the one who pushed her away. It wasn't just like, oh, we grew apart. It was, I was a real jerk to her, and she shouldn't have to put up with that. And no wonder she left. And so it's kind of slowly dawning on him.
Right.
But we've already seen, after the first ghost, we've already seen that he called her.
Right.
Because so when he panics and he thinks that he's maybe losing his grip, he calls her. She's the one person in his life, even though they've not talked, we've established for quite a lot of years at this point. That's who he turns to when he thinks that he's really losing it. And so it's kind of on his mind, which I really like. That's not something that's quite in the book in that way. But it works really well.
Can we play the next clip?
Yeah.
It says Lester Wilson.
Yeah.
So she comes back and they're in the middle of setting up the show. And so he had a panic call, and I probably even forgot he called her, but she comes up.
Right.
Well, it's been a while.
It's your hair. I've never seen it so short. It makes you look sort of grown up.
Yo, Frank, I mean, Mr. Course, check this out, man. Girls are tough. It's on the money. Check it. Come on. Here we go, lady. 5.
Would you excuse me for a moment, please?
Solid gold.
Those of you that don't know, Solid Gold was huge.
We didn't have MTV. There were no music videos.
Or not everybody could get cable. So this was it was a basic cable show that was on every weekend. Right. So it was like 81 or 80 that they started this show. And then this is 87 when they're filming it. So that person he's actually going to, he tells somebody to like staple the horns on a mouse, and she's like, how dare you? And it turns out Claire works for a charity. Of course she does, because Claire's a really good person. So she gives him her card. So that guy that interrupted, his name is Lester Wilson, and Lester Wilson was a choreographer, and I wrote a book about Saturday Night Fever that's coming out next year called Fever, The Complete History of Saturday Night Fever. You can pre-order. Anyway, Lester Wilson was the person that choreographed Saturday Night Fever. Not Denny Terrio, Lester Wilson, and that's the person you see there. He also was the choreographer for the Solid Gold dancers at this time. And he was asked to do many films. He was very popular, and he could act and he could improv, so they liked him, so that you see him there. So Lester brought 6 dancers with him to the set for Richard Donner. I talked to one of them, and I said, what was it like? And he said, Lester invited 6 of us, and we had to wear those outfits with the hats and everything. And she said we were all terrified because they hired very quickly.
Well, and also, I can imagine it's a big movie set. They're used to doing, they're cranking out Solid Gold every week in this studio, right?
Right.
And yeah, I can imagine that it would be super intimidating.
It's very intimidating. They're standing there, and there's a lot of celebrities around, and they're in these little tiny outfits and stuff. And they said Richard Donner was supposed to hire 4 of them. So Lester brought 6 and said, which ones do you want? And Richard Donner just looks and goes, I can't turn any of them away. You're all in the show. So all the girls they're all in there. So they said that they were Macarena was the one I spoke to. They had a great time. And the girl that kisses Bill Murray in the end, she was shaking like a leaf to do that on camera. She was so terrified, but that it was a really great experience. But what you saw there, that was Lester. Like Lester was, make it happen.
I mean, again, when you're hearing the pitch, when they're talking about, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And you as a viewer you're picturing it in your mind, Buddy Hackett, Mary Lou Retton, and the Solid Gold Dancers. And I remember people laughing in the theater. And then there they are, the
real Solid Gold Dancers.
The real Solid Gold Dancers. I know some of you have no idea what we're talking about, but I'm telling you, it was a huge, huge deal. So Solid Gold, I can't remember, it came up once before we were talking about Solid Gold. Don't remember why. But so Solid Gold was a show. It came out, around the same time as MTV. But as you said, not everybody had MTV. We didn't have it. I remember my cousins had it. I would only see it when I was over at my cousin's house.
Same.
And but Solid Gold, everybody had. And Solid Gold was it was a weekly show. They would tell you what the top songs of that week were, the top pop songs, right? So the top, I don't remember if it was the top 10 or what.
Yeah.
How many? It was probably 10 songs. And they would often have one of those top 10 artists on performing their song. Madonna was on there, I think, doing Holiday, if I remember. Or is that the one? No. Everybody, that one. Early baby Madonna. And the early seasons, I seem to remember, were hosted by Marilyn McCoo of the Fifth Dimension.
Andy Gibb.
And Andy Gibb.
And then he passed away.
So good looking.
Oh, I had the hots for him.
Such a shame.
Very talented.
But then, but that was only like one or two numbers. Yeah. And sometimes the hosts could always sing. So sometimes the hosts would perform one of the top songs, and then they would have one of the artists perform one of their top songs. And all the rest of the songs, they would play you about 30, 35 seconds of that song. My baby takes the money. And then the Solid Gold Dancers would do an interpretive dance with a dedicated costume to that song. And we were just riveted. We were just watching every kick and spin and lift. And they would do this. I mean, so I'm talking 1, 2, 3, at least 8 dance numbers every single week.
And it was a good gig. Like, they were all happy to have it. It paid well.
Yeah.
And so Lester was hired because he could do things really quickly and on the fly. And he had some acting background, so he got along really well with actors. So that's why I wanted to play that for
He's
you.
Great. He's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'll learn more about him. So then Frank is, then he's visited by Carol Kane. And Carol Kane is the wackiest ghost of Christmas present anybody could have imagined.
It's such a brilliant choice because it's very different than the one in the book. Because again, it's always a man, and he's always kind of large and jolly and has a big fur robe. He's got the crown on. He's got a big goblet of wine, but it's Carol. So she's this sparkly little, twinkly little fairy with her little voice. And then she is just kicking him in the nuts and headbutting him.
She really hit him and hurt him. I think I have a clip there, right?
I believe so. Let me see.
Hi, Frank. Come on. Come on out and play with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm a little muddled. 7, 8. 2, 3, 4. Oh, I'm so relieved it's been so long. Hello, Frank. I'm the ghost of Christmas present.
I had a funny feeling. Oh.
She's so insane. I love it.
It's so wacky. She's wonderful. She's always wonderful. She's never not. She's always going to elevate it. No matter what, if you throw her in there, it's going to be good. I really like the two of them together.
Yeah.
First of all, there's the short, tall joke.
Mm-hmm.
That's just constant throughout. And just that she's this, and then she's just beating the crap out of him for her
Because
entire segment.
because he wasn't even convinced yet. Like she was like, we just showed you your past and you just lost the love of your life and you've seen where you come from, and he's still just being a jerk to people. So she's literally shaking him by the shoulders, like she's taking him around. So that's when we meet Grace's family. And so and I love those scenes with Grace's family.
They're really, really good. We have, again, it's Alfred Woodard playing Grace.
Mm-hmm.
What's better than that? Instead of Tim, I forget what her little boy's name is.
Calvin.
Okay, Calvin. She has a daughter played by
Regina King?
No, it's Regina King's sister.
Oh, they look alike.
They look very much alike,
Oh,
but that
okay.
is her sister, Raina, I think is her name.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they're sisters. Yeah, it looks and sounds like Regina King, but it's Regina's sister. And then her mom,
Mabel
it's
King.
great. Her mom her mom has to watch these kids because she has to work all the time. Even when she's supposed to have time off, he makes her work. I also love the sequence. It's early on in the film where they're going over the Christmas list and he's sending everybody a towel.
Yes.
Except for the people he's trying to impress up the ladder, they're getting a VCR, which was a big deal in those days.
They were
very
expensive. Yeah, it was a big deal when we got one in our house.
But the rest of the folks got an IBC towel.
IBS.
including Grace.
Yeah.
You know, who he depends on her. He cannot do his job without her, and he treats her terribly. So we see that her little Calvin, was it after the husband dies?
Right. So the husband's been dead right. So Calvin's father, her husband, was shot and killed. And so when Bill Murray sees their family, he goes, well, where's the father? And she's like, her husband died 5 years ago. Don't you remember when she wore black for a year? And he was like, oh, I thought it was a fashion thing. And Calvin had witnessed it. So Calvin stopped talking, and they don't know how to get him to speak again. But she has 4 kids and she has grandma with her. And so, it takes her months to set up an appointment for Calvin, and they don't know how they're going to help him. But he can see that the kid is really smart and that she's in a tough situation. And Carol Kane gives him a hard time about, being cheap, and she, attacks him. And then she takes him to where his brother and his friends, who look like they're in a beer ad. He even says, this looks like a beer ad. And it's like, it totally looks like a 1980s beer ad. It's like 3 straight white couples on a couch.
Got the Fair Isle sweaters.
Mullets, and
we're playing Trivial Pursuit. It's like the most 80s Christmas ever.
But we all did it. That's exactly what it was like.
That's what we did. That was Christmas in the 80s. Christmas spectaculars on the television. We're playing trivia. This is exactly what we did. Giving each other, big mouth Billy Bass and
yes. Oh my God.
Cabbage Patch Kids.
All the things. And they're playing Trivial Pursuit. And that's when Wendy Malick, I think, plays the wife of his brother.
Yes, Wendy Malick.
She's so good. She's always great. But that's when they get a gift, and he opens up and it's a VCR. And he's like, this can't be it, because my brother would never spend this much money.
No way.
Right. And it turns out that's Grace, had him sent that instead of that. And he sends his brother, and his wife asked, what are you going to give your Frank for Christmas? And he said, I made a frame for a picture of the two of us. So it was a handmade gift. Very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really sweet. And so he realizes that he has family, and that, he had a girlfriend that he really loved, and he lost that. He had people that really cared about him, and he can still call if he needs them. Like, she's reminding him, like, they're still there. You could still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I like the way that Wendy is not, we don't have a Mrs. Cratchit really in this scenario. Grace has her mom, but the mom's really the mom is not really, she's a little bit like, I can't believe you guys, how he treats you kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not quite to the degree of a Mrs. Cratchit. And Wendy also is, actually, I think that the nephew has a girlfriend in the book. So she's admires she admires, what's his name? Is his name John? Robert? What's the brother's name?
I think it's John.
She admires him for trying to keep in touch with his brother, trying to keep that relationship open. And she, it's not because he wants something from his rich brother. It's just because they're family and he wants to keep that connection. They have some happy memories together. And I really like that.
Yeah.
I like that they have Wendy there to be that voice. I just think the whole cast is so well done. Even though we have a lot of different choices from the book, it just works really super well. Now, in between these ghost visits, as we said before, just like after Marley or John Forsythe's character, I can't remember what he's called in the movie,
Lou.
but everybody has different names. Lou. After he shows up, Bill Murray freaks out and calls his ex-girlfriend, right? And she comes to, like Margot said, she comes to visit on the set and sees the solid gold dancers and all of that. And he's kind of a jerk. And she goes like, okay, well, I guess whatever. See you later.
Here's my card. Call me if you need me.
Have a good life.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's my card. And so he decides to go, like he has this impulse to try to see her, but he also has this impulse to be a jerk, a greedy jerk. So on an impulse to try to see her, he goes to this place to find her, and he wants to sweep her off her feet and take her out of there. But she has obligations there. She has things she wants to do there, and it's a sort of a homeless shelter of sorts. They're hooking people up with various services and giving them shelter from the cold. And he meets, as he's waiting to see her, he meets some of the people who are taking shelter there that holiday season. And he talks with them for a little bit and he's joking around and that's all great. And she sees that and she's like, oh, maybe he's not such a bad guy. And then, no, he actually is. Because he won't wait for her.
He demands that she leave.
Single phone call.
Right. He demands that she leaves with him when he wants to go. So he's very self-centered.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's when Lumpy is what she calls him because she gave him a lump in his head. And it's James is the name of the brother. It's John Murray plays James. Yeah. I'm not wearing my glasses, so I have to like double check. Okay. So he goes to that shelter. He meets some of the people that visit the shelter. And then he sees one of the men that was at the shelter. He sees him later and he's frozen to death. And so Frank is reminded like what could happen to anybody at any time, really. And and so he goes back to the office, and now, Bobcat Goldthwait, Elliot, is arriving back with a shotgun because he's gonna. Yeah, this part is
these little sequences. There's these little sequences throughout the film. Poor Bobcat Goldthwait. Yeah. Like he gets fired, and we just see he gets knock after knock after knock. His wife leaves him. He gets soaked over and over again with freezing water. He's on the street. Somebody takes his shoes. I mean, it's really terrible. And he finally reaches his breaking point and he decides he's going to have revenge on the man who fired him. And he shows up back at the office just as Frank is waiting for the ghost of Christmas future. He shows up with a shotgun. And now Frank is wondering, like, has Elliot all this time been the ghost of Christmas future? He's not really sure. He at this point is very much losing his grip on reality. Frank is. And as he encounters the ghost of Christmas future, that's the actor who's playing the role for the Christmas Spectacular and thinks it's the real ghost and kind of flips out and gets kind of shuttled up to his office out of harm's way, if you will, for the production, the live production. And then when the real ghost of Christmas future shows up, it's pretty scary.
Yeah, he's dead, and Claire is no longer helping people, and he's forgotten about. Only his brother and his wife are there at his funeral, and he realizes, what am I doing this all for? And as he's coming to this realization that, oh, I could change this. This is something I have some power here. I'm the president of this network. They're doing A Christmas Carol right now. I actually could probably do something great right now. And this is when Bobcat is starting to shoot at him with a shotgun, which America, unfortunately, that's become, a little too regular for my comfort, but it's played for laughs here. But he eventually convinces Elliot, no, I've turned a new leaf. I'm going to hire you back. I'll give you a raise. You got to help me. We got to stop this production. We have to do a real version. We have to do a better version of what we're putting out. So this is when Frank, as Bill Murray, goes on set and interrupts the live performance. And I remember in the theater, like, how exciting this was, because
it was.
We didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, he just stops the live performance.
There's no basis for any of this in the book whatsoever. So we don't know. We're in all new territory here. We know that there's going to be 3 ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
We know that he's going to, we know what the kind of the deal with the brother. We know there's a Tiny Tim character and all of that. But yeah, you're right. At this point, there's Bobcat Goldthwait in the control room with a shotgun, and Bill Murray is going to interrupt a live television broadcast of A Christmas Carol starring Buddy Hackett, Jamie Farr, and Mary Lou Retton featuring the Solid Gold Dancers.
And thus, Bill Murray gives a performance of a lifetime, I think, is he points out how shabby it all is, how tacky it all is, how it's taking away from the true core message. And this is when he starts speaking. And as he's doing this, the president of the network wants to stop it, and the director wants to stop it. This is when Bobcat shows up, and he has a shotgun, and he's using it he's terrorizing the crew that's in the booth, that's putting on this whole show. And then so Bill Murray is then allowed to do this performance. And I guess that's our last clip today.
We do indeed. Hang on.
It's Christmas Eve. It's the one night of the year when we all act a little nicer. We smile a little easier. We share a little more. For a couple of hours out of the whole year, we are the people that we always hoped we would be. It's a miracle. It's really a sort of a miracle, because it happens every Christmas Eve. And if you waste that miracle, you're going to burn for it. I know what I'm talking about. You have to do something. You have to take a chance. You do have to get involved. There are people that are having trouble making their miracle happen. There are people that don't have enough to eat. There are people that are cold. You can go out and say hello to these people. You can take an old blanket out of the closet and say, here. You can make them a sandwich and say, oh, by the way, here. I get it now. And if you give, then it can happen. Then the miracle can happen to you. It's not just the poor and the hungry. It's everybody who's got to have this miracle. And it can happen tonight for all of you. If you believe in this spirit thing, the miracle will happen, and then you'll want it to happen again tomorrow. You won't be one of these bastards who says Christmas is once a year and it's a fraud. It's not. It can happen every day. You just got to want that feeling. And if you like it and you want it, you'll get greedy for it. You'll want it every day of your life, and it can happen to you. I believe in it now. I believe it's going to happen to me now. I'm ready for it. It's great. It's a good feeling. It's really better than I felt in a long time.
Come on.
The Solid Gold Dancers are just the icing on the cake.
Right?
I just love the use. The way that they're used in this production is just so beautiful. I think it's, again, that Donner's television background coming through. Like, he knows like having the Solid Gold Dancers, like, just right there on the sidelines during the speech.
With Mary Lou Retton. I mean, it's really great. I love this movie. I mean, I know.
I was really surprised how well it held up.
Same. I think some people feel that it's too cynical. He's just a little too mean. But I think maybe in 88 it could have felt that way, but it certainly doesn't now for me.
No, it sure doesn't. No.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think but I'm always elated by the end. I'm always sort of won over by it.
You don't know what's going to happen to is he going to go to jail?
Right.
I don't know. but all of the, uh Claire sees it, they're watching it in the shelter there, and everybody's cheering, and it's just so heartwarming. I love it. I just think again, I was super surprised. I was ready for it to be dated. I hadn't watched it in a really
Yeah,
long time,
same.
and so I was kind of preparing myself, but I was very surprised, not just how, like, thematically relevant it still is, even though it's, again, in a television landscape that doesn't exist anymore. It's still very much applicable to today with our tech billionaires
Mhm.
and social media. And I was also really impressed with how well the effects really hold up.
They're practical effects. I think if this were made
Yeah.
like 10 years later, it would look like a totally different movie because they would have
Yeah.
CGI all over the place and it would not work.
Yeah. But when the ghost of Christmas Future leans in and his face is a television screen, that's so genius.
Mhm.
I love it. I just love it. And all the things with, it's Carol Kane when she's flying, and, she's flittering here. Of course, she's on little strings, but I love it. It's so well done.
Yeah.
It's really super well done. And John Forsythe's makeup in that, oh, it's so gross. But it's obviously him moving around in it, it really does. It's remarkably relevant. I was surprised at how very relatable it still is. Really didn't think that it would be as much as it ended up being.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, there's some cynicism there, but I think it's kind of like prescient of like what will happen in the future.
Yeah. So I mean, I spoiled it earlier, but book or movie?
Oh, it's going to be book, but I
It's
still love this story.
This is really good. Not all of the Scrooge adaptations are so fabulous. And another thing that I think I didn't appreciate as a younger person watching this in the movie theater, but watching it this time, one of the things that I think is so genius, just like the placement of the solid gold dancers, the fact that we're cutting to and from this cuckoo bananas production, right? Buddy Hackett is playing this role absolutely straight. He's 100% straight. He is not mugging for the camera one iota. The king of mugging for the camera. And he has just gone totally method. He is Ebenezer Scrooge. And I think that's really, if he had been hamming it up, like, it just wouldn't have worked as well. That part of it that it's so outlandish, and yet we're watching it happen before our very eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That it works so well, I think is again, I think that's all Donner, but I think it really keeps this movie moving along and feeling fresh and relevant. I just am so impressed by the way they wove that into this story. And that's really what brings it up into the modern era and keeps it there, I guess, because, like I said, I wasn't at all. I mean, and even if you didn't know who the Solid Gold dancers were, or who Buddy Hackett or Jamie Farr are, and why that's so hilarious to have them be the leads section of A Christmas Carol, you still would find it still works. It still works. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. We've got to say score by Danny Elfman.
Yeah, I was just going to say that myself. Yeah, it's a great score too.
Very good score. Yeah. Yeah, super, super well done. But I have, like I say, I don't think I have yet seen a version of this story that is better than the book. The writing this is very good writing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's Dickens, The Christmas Carol we're talking about here. It's great. It was so much fun. I really loved watching this, and I was surprised. Yeah, it super holds up.
Yep. Same here.
Yep. So coming up next, we have a very interesting choice. This is another one that our folks in the Facebook group have brought up for many years. It's the week, as we were going to post this, it'll be the week between Christmas and New Year's, the last week of the year. And I recently learned that it's a tradition among the bookish, because I follow a lot of BookTube on YouTube. I just love YouTube. I watch a lot of YouTube.
Me too.
And I've noticed that among the BookTube people, there seems to be this tradition of this particular week between Christmas and New Year's, of reading, just like a lot of people read A Christmas Carol right before Christmas. A lot of bookie type people read 84 Charing Cross Road during this week between Christmas and New Year's. And early on in this year, I had to have a tremendous amount of dental work done. And so I was listening to the audiobook.
Oh, okay. And it helped?
Yes, I was really nervous, and I was going to be there for like a couple of hours. And the hygienist happened to say to me, "Oh, if you have an audiobook or something like that you could put on, that might be a good idea." And I said, "Really?" So I put in my little earbuds, and I thought, "Oh, people have been talking about this 84 Charing Cross Road." So I listened to the audiobook, and then I loved it so much that I then read the book. But I have held off watching the movie. I have not seen the movie. I'm dying to see it because it stars one of my favorite movie stars of all time, Anne Bancroft. We are going to be talking finally about 84 Charing Cross Road.
I've never seen it either, so I'm really excited about that. That's what's coming up. We're always looking for suggestions. It's going to be a new year. We have all kinds of months coming up. We do musicals in March. We have mysteries in May, but all year round, we're looking for ideas. It could be a book. It could be a magazine article, whatever's been adapted into a movie. All those places I mentioned at the top of the show, please reach out to us. Our email, once again, is bookversusmoviepodcast@gmail.com. And Margot, where can they find you?
You can find me online at coloniabook.com, and all my social media callouts are at She's Nacho Mama. And where can they find you?
You can find me at brooklynfitchick.com. I'm at brooklynfitchick for Threads and Instagram. I'm at Brooklyn Margot for TikTok and for Blue Sky. And on YouTube, I'm at my name, Margot Donahue. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Happy holidays. We'll be back soon with a new episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Book versus Movie podcast. We're a part of the Spreaker Podcast Network. Go to Spreaker.com to check out all of the shows they offer. We ask that you make sure to subscribe to our podcast, Book vs. Movie, in your podcast app, so that way you'll never miss an episode. If you want to interact with the Margos, the best place to do that is in our private Facebook group. Go to Facebook and type in Book vs. Movie podcast group and ask to join. On social media, you can find us on Instagram and Threads. You spell out Book versus and Movie. Our email is bookversusmoviepodcast, spelled it all out, at gmail.com. This is Margot D, and you can find me at my blog, brooklynfitchick.com, and I'm at Brooklyn Fitchick for Threads and Instagram. And on TikTok, I'm at Brooklyn Margot. I'm also at Brooklyn Margot for Blue Sky. Margot P. You can find her on all social media at She's Nacho Mama. We really appreciate the listen, and if you have ideas for us, we not only cover books, but also short stories, magazine articles, plays,